critical hit in this game. We've seen so many of those on stream just yesterday and today.
The curse of Malmö regionals is that every time a critical hit happens, the Pokemon just happens to be on low hit points.
I'm pretty sure,
we'll see if that continues into this top 4 match as these trainers stare each other down, have a little look at the judge to their side as well. You know, these players have been playing a little while now. Maurice, I had the pleasure to interview when he won the Bremen Regional Championships, and what a fantastic player from Germany, a little bit newer to the scene, but doing well last season, as well as having a little bit of a result just a few weeks ago in the Utrecht special event.
Very solid results from Maurice, and of course Marco has a longer list of accolades, just, you know, top 8 champion, top cuts, so many different accolades. I think if we can't really fit them all on the screen, but that doesn't mean that one player with the more experience or more achievements is going to be the winner. We've seen so many times today on stream, a lot of upsets, so both these players have really equal chances of winning, and Maurice with this dual screens and Intimidate from the Toros is going to prove to be a really tough matchup.
I think it really will be. I do wonder how this game will play out. We will have to see. Only time will tell, as these players, I believe, will be getting started very shortly. In the meantime, looking at those achievements, it has me taking a trip down memory lane, actually. I played against Marco in the top 4 of the Jönköping Regional Championships back in 2019. Obviously, Marco was able to come out triumphant, and maybe that's why I'm back behind the desk and Marco is on the top 4 tables in this regional championship. But it was one of the first times I'd come across Marco, and it was really clear that there was so much potential in his play, and it's really been great to see him develop over the last few years. I
watched all of Marco's games this weekend. Here we've got Maurice's team up on the screen. So as we've mentioned earlier, there's that very interesting Paldean Fire Tauros and a Grimmsnarl, 2 not very commonly used Pokemon, and a Goldengo, which dropped off a little bit in usage, but I think it seems to be picking back up.
I think a lot of players have struggled to integrate Goldengo into their teams with the power level that Fluttermane has. Sure, Goldengo has Make It Rain, which is super effective against Fluttermanes, especially when a lot of them are carrying Choice Specs and a lot of them are going for Terra Fairy. So you kind of guarantee those knockouts, but you have to take a lot of damage in return, usually, to be able to do so. And that makes Goldengo a little bit more challenging to use, but no less effective when used properly. The one other thing that sticks out there is the Encore on the Iron Bundle. We'll have to talk about that a little later as we see Marco's team coming up on your screen.
Marco's team a little bit more standard with the Fluttermane, Kingambit, Chi-Yu, Iron Bundle, Great Tusk and Talonflame, although the Talonflame's moveset is not standard at all. Well, mostly standard, but instead of something like a Taunt, it's got a Sunny Day. So, you know, just trying to do a bit of manual weather, maybe Talonflame thinking it's a Murkrow, just trying to set up some Sun to help out Chi-Yu, Great Tusk and Fluttermane on the team.
Certainly similar to a Murkrow, but Talonflame definitely has utility of its own with that Shark Beak Brave Bird being able to do lots and lots of damage, and 3 Pokemon in that Fluttermane, Chi-Yu and Great Tusk that really do appreciate being in the sun. Fluttermane and Great Tusk because of their photosynthesis ability, and of course Chi-Yu because of its fire type power.
Ooh, overheat from Chi-Yu in the sun is absolutely terrifying for any player to face. I believe a lot of Pokemon, even if they resist that fire move, are going to be here. And now we've got the polls up on the screen, so please show your support for these players by voting for who you think will win or who's just your favorite.
Absolutely. Who are you supporting from back home? Who do you think is going to win? Who have you been working with across the season? It doesn't matter what it is. If you're watching along with us now, do cast your votes in the chat. Maurice Uteg on your left, Marco Silva on your right.
Yes, you have until the start of the game begins to cast your votes, so please go ahead and vote for them.
Definitely. And as we get into this top 4 match in the Malmö Regional Championship, Zoe, what are you looking for out of both of these players in what they're going to be leading this time round?
I think I've seen consistently Maurice always, bringing the golden go with him. And sometimes he's keeping it in the back. A lot of the times he tends to lead with it. And also that Grim Cells, once it sets up the screens, it'll just go for a parting shot, get itself out of the way, lower the opponent's offenses, and then bring in a more offensive Pokemon from the back. And Marco's playstyle he just makes no mistakes when he plays. He's just so spot on with the targeting. And here we have game 1 of our semi-finals. Grimmsnarl and Fluttermane versus Fluttermane and Chi-Yu.
Making no mistakes is definitely something that you want to do in the top 4 of any event. Fluttermane and Grimmsnarl is going to put on a little bit of offensive pressure there from Maurice's side of the field, especially if we do get that light screen coming out against the Fluttermane and Chi-Yu on Marco's side of the field. That's going to reduce a lot of the damage coming out and kind of negate Chi-Yu's ability almost. Of course, both of these trainers will have the opportunity to go for their terrors on the Fluttermane. That could make a big difference if either of them choose to go for a Shadow Ball into the other ones, but it really is the player that holds their nerve the best that will get the most out of the first turn.
Indeed, and I don't think we've seen the two Fluttermane's interactions against each other, so we don't know who's going to be the faster Fluttermane. We are going to get that turn 1 Terror coming out from, I think that is Maurice's side of a Terra Fairy. Yes, that is,
We'll have to see what is coming out
Too much
there.
fun.
So
Oh,
it
actually,
is
no, that's
actually Marco.
So
Could be this turn that it's Maurice going for the Terra
Yes.
Fairy.
So actually that might indicate that Marco's Fluttermane is faster, although it could also be a speed tie. I think only both the trainers themselves would know the answer to that.
Yeah, certainly would, as both of these Fluttermanes stare each other down. The definitely very reasonable light screen coming out. It looks like this Fluttermane on Marco's side of the field will be the faster of the two. The Grimmsnarl hanging on with just a little bit of health. A very well-trained Grimmsnarl indeed. Dazzling Gleam coming out from the Fluttermane on Maurice's side, and you can see the effect of both the light screen coming out, but also that Marco switched out the Chi-Yu and reduced the damage of his own Fluttermane.
Yes, I think if the Chi-Yu was actually on the field, I wonder if that Grimmsnarl would have survived the Dazzling Gleam. But King Gambit still took so much damage from that Dazzling Gleam. Of course, it is a Terra Fairy Fluttermane, but King Gambit it took nearly 50%. So, this King Gambit isn't that safe staying in on the field.
Well, it could be safe in this position if there was a Sucker Punch and a Dazzling Gleam. If the speed interactions that we saw in the first turn are to be trusted, that's exactly what we're starting to see right now. A Sucker Punch into the Fluttermane on Maurice's side of the field. Parting Shot follow-up from that Grimmsnarl will be dropping the offensive capabilities yet further of the Fluttermane on Marco's side of the field, and it will be the Amoonguss switching in for that Grimmsnarl.
A very safe switch in for the Amoonguss over there. Just, knowing that Marco's Fluttermane is locked into the Dazzling Gleam, so Amoonguss will not be taking very much damage, and it's going to knock out on that Fluttermane. So the light screen and the Parting Shot is not enough to save Maurice's Fluttermane from getting knocked out.
And looking at the Pokemon that Maurice has brought to this game, there's really not a lot of offensive capability left within it. You've got the Grimmsnarl in the back, you've got the Amoonguss on the field. We can see a sneak peek that it's Iron Bundle as the 4th Pokemon for Maurice. And Marco is running a hyper-offensive team, right? You've got the Fluttermane, which is Choice Specs, still on the field with its Terra Fairy. You've got that King Gambit that's actually still going to do quite a bit of work in this position, as well as the Chi-Yu in the back. So in terms of offensive pressure, Marco's definitely taking an early lead here.
Definitely, and the light screen and the Parting Shot, it slowed down this Fluttermane, but it still was not enough to prevent its teammates from getting knocked out. And Marco just playing flawlessly, switching out the correct Pokemon at the right times. And that King Gambit switch in was really critical in allowing that Fluttermane to survive with, quite a bit of health left. And
certainly will be surviving this turn as well. The Iron Bundle going for the Protect. Amoonguss will be targeted down this turn by the Dazzling Gleam first from the Fluttermane, and then the Assurance follow-up. It's not enough to pick up the KO on this Amoonguss. It is going to be munching on its Citrus Berry, going up to just below 50% HP, and a very critical Spore going into that King Gambit. That's going to give this Iron Bundle a lot of freedom to move.
of course, now this Iron Bundle seems to be one of the the Grimmsnarl in the back doesn't have that much offensive presence. Of course, Spirit Break can deal damage, but it's looking like Maurice's Iron Bundle is going to be the main damage dealer, so he's going to have to keep that very, very safe to make sure that he can knock out his opponent's Pokemon.
And, you know, in this position, the Amoonguss on Maurice's side of the field can take the opportunity to heal up the Iron Bundle with a Pollen Puff to make sure it stays on the field into the late game. But it really does depend on how many turns that King Gambit stays asleep. It's got 1 turn of guaranteed sleep right now. It's going to be taking a Hydro Pump from that Iron Bundle. Dazzling Gleam following up from the Flutter Mane is going to be a lot less offensive than it could certainly be, and doing less than 50% to that Iron Bundle.
Yeah, that Light Screen and also the Parting Shot just proving Grimmsnarl's value in helping that, because Iron Bundle is just not a Pokemon that's very well known for having high special defense, and a lot of instances we have seen Iron Bundle just get knocked out immediately by a Flutter Mane. So, you know, this Flutter Mane still on the field, just, you know, King Gambit, of course, getting knocked out from a Hydro Pump connecting, which is very cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely hitting its mark there. I'm sure Maurice would have been very happy to see that. Flutter Mane taking its mandatory turn of sleep there as the Pollen Puff does heal up all of the damage from that Iron Bundle. So while Maurice has only really 1 Pokemon that's providing offense in this position, it's doing a pretty good job supported by that Amoonguss right now.
Yeah, after taking that Dazzling Gleam, it went, you know, didn't really take that much damage. It was still left comfortably in the green. But now this Iron Bundle from Marco is coming out, and that means that the Booster Energy getting activated, increasing its speed. So both Iron Bundles are going to be presumably speed tying, and you know, this Amoonguss is also in danger of getting hit by any super effective Ice type moves from that Iron Bundle. There's no Terra options left for either player now, because the Terra's being done.
Definitely has been. Yeah, the Iron Bundle on Marco's side of the field is a really nice last Pokemon to have left. Iron Bundles facing off against each other do tend to have a little bit of a tricky time knocking each other out, and certainly Maurice has the Light Screen on his side of the field, but you know, with only 1 Iron Bundle, you know, and very many offensive options for Maurice, it's going to be a tall order. Protect coming out from that Amoonguss, and the Iron Bundle will block the Freeze Dry coming out from Maurice's Iron Bundle, and Flutter Mane is waking up, getting another Dazzling Gleam, doing a good chunk of damage.
That Flutter Mane is probably very happy right now. It managed to get off an attack for free because its partner Iron Bundle protected against the Freeze Dry. Flutter Mane is just, at this moment, just dealing a bit of chip damage. It may be choice specs, but it did take a Parting Shot from a Grimmsnarl earlier. So, you know, Marco just deciding to leave the Flutter Mane in because it's still doing damage, even though the damage is chipped, and, you know, recognizing the Iron Bundle is just the main damage dealer.
Marco not making any mistakes this turn and not falling for the Protect on the Iron Bundle that Maurice went for. Is going to get that Freeze Dry into the Amoonguss, is going to knock it out, is going to follow up with the Dazzling Gleam from the Flutter Mane. The Iron Bundle isn't going down this turn, Zoe, but it's looking like it's going to be Marco that's going to be taking this first game of the top 4 match between Maurice Uteg and Marco Silva.
Maurice, yes, recognizing that this game is going to be Marco's. But well done to Marco for winning that game 1. I wonder what sort of adjustments Maurice will be making for this game 2.
Well, definitely got to be thinking about how to really get those offensive options going. You know, when you've got a team that's a little bit more defensive in its construction, sometimes you can not quite do enough damage, and when Marco's bringing all of these relentless attackers, you do actually have to kind of knock them out to stop them keeping doing damage over and over again. We saw that Light Screen did go up, but that Flutter Mane stayed on the field, right? It just kept on going, and eventually that's going to be enough.
Maurice brought both Grimmsnarl and Amoonguss, 2 Pokemon that don't really have that much offensive presence. So even though he was successful in being able to reduce the damage from Marco's side, he couldn't entirely stop it, but then and he also couldn't deal enough damage back. So Marco, we saw that Flutter Mane was really like a choice specs Flutter Mane. Terra Fairy was doing, you know, 40% to an Iron Bundle, but it wasn't threatened, so it was just free to just keep spamming that move over and over again.
Yeah, eventually it will be enough. I tell you, the Pokemon that I want to see, and you've already called out, Zoe, is that Blaze Breed Taurus there coming out from Maurice's side of the field. I think it'd be a good option, especially knowing what Marco had brought in the last game. Most notably that Great Tusk actually stayed at home. That gives a lot of opportunity for Maurice to be able to go for that Blaze Breed Taurus. Unlike Arcanine to a point, it's a little bit less threatened by the King Gambit on Marco's side of the field. You don't mind if it gets a Defiant boost in its attack from the Intimidate, because you've got close combat, in contrast to Arcanine's Flare Blitz, which doesn't actually pick up the KO.
And you almost want to actually proc that Defiant, because this Tauros is holding a Mirror Herb, so once once that King Gambit gets the Defiant boost, your Tauros will be at +2, whereas the King Gambit is actually at +1, and you outspeed. You can also go for the Will-O-Wisp, so, you know, Tauros might be a good option. But we are going to get straight into Game 2, Grimmsnarl, Golden Go, and Fluttermane versus Chi-Yu.
And it is Golden Go landing on the field that I'm most excited to see in this position. Certainly one of the Pokemon on Maurice's side of the field that will be able to dish out a little bit more damage, as well as threaten that Fluttermane. But first it must overcome the Chi-Yu and the Fluttermane in front of it. Grimmsnarl will help a lot with that, with the light screen, of course, but I think it's probably going to be forced to go for Terra Water if it wants to make any headway in this game.
Light Screen might be helpful in reducing damage, but it does not stop the damage. And this Golden Go is just so heavily threatened. But Fluttermane actually going to be withdrawn this turn, and in comes the King Gambit. So a really nice switch, and I wonder if Marco was predicting some sort of Spirit Break or Parting Shot into that Fluttermane, but we did see a Light Screen coming off from.
It's a really nice way to position yourself as Light Screen goes up onto the field. Heatwave coming out from that Chi-Yu is going to land into the Protect on the Golden Go, and of course go into that Grimmsnarl, doing a good amount of chip damage. Actually, most notably, these two Dark-type Pokemons on Marco's side of the field are not affected by Prankster moves anymore, and so that Parting Shot isn't a risk into that King Gambit switching. In fact, it would in fact fail. But that actually, in itself, is a great way to play the turn for Marco. Just make sure this Grimmsnarl is doing as little as possible.
This Golden Go is still really heavily threatened. Even though the Fluttermane switched out, this King Gambit is now coming in with super effective Dark-type moves, and it already went for the Protect last turn, so it's unlikely to go for Protect again, and we can see Maurice just taking the time to make a decision on exactly what to do. There is the Tauros hiding out in the back, and it is going to switch in this turn.
Grimmsnarl leaving the field, not wanting to take any more damage. Tauros joins the field. You have your wish, Zoe, as Intimidate goes off onto the King Gambit and the Chi-Yu, activating that Defiant ability, and here it is, the mechanic that you called out, Zoe. It will be that Mirror Herb getting a +2 boost in attack onto that Tauros. Dark Pulse coming on onto the Golden Go, not picking up the KO, and a really crucial bit of chip damage, breaking the Focus Sash on that Chi-Yu.
Of course, this Golden Go now is going to faint from a double up of the Heat Wave plus Assurance. You know, there's no way it can survive that hit, no matter if there's a Reflect or a Light Screen upper. Maybe that was something that Maurice was planning, or maybe he was banking a little bit more on this +2 Tauros to win him the game this time.
Well, in contrast to Game 1, where Iron Bundle was the only damage dealer remaining going into the mid-game in Game 1, it'll be the Taurus this time that has to take the mantle of damage dealer against Marco's team. And Maurice making a little bit of a decision between bringing in Grimmsnarl and the sneak peek that we have of the Amoonguss in the back as well. Grimmsnarl is the Pokemon of choice entering the field, yeah, is going to be able to start, chipping away at Marco's team, I think.
Grimmsnarl by itself naturally has quite high attack, so its Spirit Breaks will do quite a bit of damage. And Tauros now, with its Fire and Fighting typing, is actually a really good Pokemon against both the King Gambit and Chi-Yu. Neither of them can actually hit the Tauros for super effective damage. Sucker Punch coming out, not really doing that much, and then a follow-up Heat Wave from that Chi-Yu. Grimmsnarl managing to actually dodge the attack, and Tauros just taking it really, really well.
Like an absolute champ in the making there. Flare Blitz is going to be able to knock out the King Gambit. onto Marco's side of the field, and it will be a Spirit Break follow-up if I saw correctly. Yes, there it is, coming into that Chi-Yu, doing quite a bit of damage, really good damage to be doing to that Chi-Yu, but I think notably dropping the special attack of the Chi-Yu. I'm not sure how much of a difference it's going to make. That Taurus is looking like it's on pretty low health right now, and that Fluttermane coming in likely be able to pick up a one-hit knockout here onto the Taurus with its health remaining. So a little bit of a precarious position here for Maurice.
The Taurus is one of those, but even though it's similar to Arcanine having the Intimidate, its fighting type means it actually takes neutral damage from Fluttermane's Fairy type move. So in this instance, Taurus isn't going to match up quite as well against the Fluttermane as Arcanine does. And Taurus, of course, its move, close combat and Flare Blitz both really hurt it when it uses it, especially Flare Blitz forcing it to take a recoil. We're going to see a Terra option coming out from Maurice, going for a Terra Fairy onto his Fluttermane, just wanting to secure that extra bit of damage. And
it will, in fact, be Marco's Fluttermane that will be going. We've seen a lot of Fluttermanes over the weekend, Zoe. I'm not surprised that you've got a little bit of Flutterbrain. There we go. Flutterbrain. We'll coin that term there. Grimmsnarl also going for the Terra, lighting the way with its Terra Fire, hopefully for Maurice to have a potential to get into the finals here. Tauros going for the Protect, making sure it's not going down this turn. A Dazzling Gleam follow-up from that Fluttermane on Marco's side of the field is going to do resisted damage to this Grimmsnarl, and I think we'll see the choice of Terra coming in strong here. A Heat Wave follow-up from the Chi-Yu as well, going into both of these Pokemon, of course, not doing any damage to the protecting Tauros, and allowing Grimmsnarl to survive this turn, and it will be a all-critical hit into that Fluttermane, dropping its special attack and doing significant damage. You
know what? When I said earlier that Grimmsnarl has no offensive presence, I take that all back. It's doing a lot to Marco's side. Fluttermane almost getting knocked out, and Chi-Yu also getting quite heavily chipped. And most critically, both these special attackers on Marco's side are at -1, and now the Grimmsnarl is going to switch out with a parting shot, dropping that Fluttermane down even further.
I really like the way that Maurice is playing this, going for as much damage as possible onto the Fluttermane and then lowering its stats further. With the light screen, with that parting shot, there's a chance that this Tauros, now that the Fluttermane is locked into Dazzling Gleam, will be enough to survive, but it's not. It will be going down. Fluttermane taking the KO onto this Taurus. Amoonguss taking a little bit of chip damage and a Dark Pulse on the switch-in, taking it down to low HP now. It's going to be struggling to do any damage, and that Grimmsnarl, Terra Fire on low HP, and this Amoonguss are going to have to pull something out of the bag for Maurice to have an opportunity to get into the finals of the Malmö Regional Championships.
It's looking very dicey for Maurice over here. Grimmsnarl is effectively the only offensive option for Maurice. The Amoonguss with its Pole and Puff really cannot do that much damage, but the Grimmsnarl is so slow and it doesn't have access to Sucker Punch. So it is going to be moving last, and the Fluttermane just straight away going for the Dazzling Gleam, of course, being locked into it, doing a little bit of chip damage, but Chi-Yu can follow up with a Dark Pulse, which now no longer resists, and it is enough to knock it out.
It's going to be the Grimmsnarl going back to Maurice. Only the little Amoonguss that could left on the field, and it will be launching a Pollen Puff into its partner Pokemon, hoping that it would be enough to allow Maurice to get yet more Spirit Breaks off onto Marco's Pokemon, but not anymore. Maurice is forfeiting, and Marco Silva will be your second finalist at the Malmö Regional Championship, facing off against Matty Morgan.
Well done to Marco, just playing so flawlessly. I've just seen him play flawlessly all weekend, not making a single mistake, and with a hyper-offensive team such as his, if you're taking the initiative, you're just never letting your opponents having any breathing room, and forcing your opponents to actually react to your moves is something that's really scary to face. And Maurice having a more defensive team was just put on the back foot, always trying to lessen the damage rather than deal out any damage himself.
ever since Marco's first regional win, he's been piloting that heavy offensive strategy, and you can see why that's so effective for him. As you say, Zoe, not making any mistakes, even at this late stage in the tournament. We've had 2 full days of playing Pokemon, but of course, Marco, no stranger to that, it has the mental resilience to carry on and just keep making the right moves.
He has so much experience at this point. And I remember when we were interviewing him earlier, he was talking about, you know, the different play styles and teams that he liked to try. And he said he has tried the more balanced kind of defensive teams, and he has tried the hyper offense. And he finds that the hyper offense play style is one that clicks with him the most, because, you know, the best defense is offense. If you KO your opponents before they can get to you, then you don't have to worry about any defensive plays.
Not in the slightest, and that's definitely a mindset that you at home can take away from this masterclass of the hyper-offensive archetype there. Talking about a little bit more about the game, I really do think it was the case that Marco decided that he didn't really need any speed control from the Talonflame. Because Maurice was running a slower, bulkier, more defensive team, Marco already kind of had the tailwind, so to speak. You know, he was already going to be faster with most of his Pokemon, and he could use that to really great effect. Sitting there with the Fluttermane in Game 1, just carrying on Dazzling Gleaming for a while. In Game 2, it was the Fluttermane again that was just sitting on the field, just keeping on doing damage and supported by Chi Yu. It really is quite difficult for a team like Maurice's to be able to deal with.
I don't think we even saw him reveal his final Pokemon in that second game. So, you know, he could have had something like an Iron Bundle in the back with an Icy Wind just for speed control. Because, of course, when we looked at Maurice's team, he had an Iron Bundle, but that Iron Bundle did not have Icy Wind.
Right.
It was Freeze Dry and Hydro Pump and Encore, which is a little bit more unconventional. But Marco just identifying during the team preview stage, actually, my opponent has no speed control. They've only got, you know, damage control. And guessing, he probably made a call that if my opponent is going to be quite balanced in his team, then chances are they're going to be slow and defensive. So, you know what? I'm just going to go straight in with my next Pokemon.
And we're going to find out a lot more about that as we have Marco ready to speak about both a little bit about his run and, of course, the match that he just played against Maurice to catapult him into the finals. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm here with Marco Silva, our next finalist of the Malmö Regional Championships. Marco, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. Like, as you know, in my last regional I went to, I only, let's say, got to top 4. So I'm really proud to finally get to the final again.
Yeah, what an impressive thing to do. You know, give yourself a pat on the back. It's no mean feat just reaching the semi-final, like you said, but to go all the way and reach the final this time, that's really consistent results and absolutely wonderful to see. Now, Maurice, your opponent in that game, he wasn't running the most conventional team. So how did you feel going into that match? Yeah,
so like I already kind of knew the team since it's like mostly from a Japanese build. A Japanese guy already used this team in one of the IC online, since for them it's very important, since they qualify for the World Championship by that tournament. So I kind of knew about that team before this tournament, and also some friends of mine were practicing with this team. But yeah, I already played against Maurice during the Swiss rounds, and I lost actually in round 10. And the games were actually pretty different because he never brought Grimmsnarl or Goldengo. He brought like Amoonguss, Charlemagne with the Tauros and Iron Bundle in the back. And the game were kind of, we can say, randomic, because it was like Charlemagne, Amoonguss against Chi Yu and Charlemagne. And it was all based on like who he was going to Terra, who was going to protect, and yeah, what type of moves was going for. So he kind of realized that probably that play was not the most consistent one. So he decided to switch out for like a plan with Goldengo or with just Grimmsnarl in the middle. And yeah, I mean, that worked for me, but at the same time, I kind of also, I gotta give a props to him, because I kind of thought about like not bringing the King Gambit in the matchup, because I was like, he never brought like Goldengo actually. So King Gambit is not that good into that team unless they bring Goldengo. So even in game 1, he kind of did kind of well, because he lead specifically Fluttermane plus Grinsnar, but if it wasn't for that lead or just Goldengo in general, King M is actually not really good in the matchup.
Sure. Okay. But you made that call to bring it, and it paid dividends for you. That's really good to see. And in game 2, having won that, were you expecting to win that first game?
Yeah. So after the first turn, I kind of realized that I was in a really good spot, because after seeing the damage of Dazzling Gleam, the third Dazzling Gleam after light screen, I can realize that since Sucker Punch goes before Reflect, since I kind of fast with King Gambit, I'm actually able to then get a lot of damage, like 30% with Sucker Punch. That then is gonna make me able to kill the Fire Main, even if he goes for a party shot into my Fire Main. So yeah, I kind of knew that was in a really good spot. I just had to not choke in the last few turns against the last two Pokemon.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's just goes to show how important those tiny changes in damage and speed calculations are. The fact that your King Gambit was slightly faster than that Grimmsnarl, able to go for the Sucker Punch before the Reflect. Okay, and then going into game 2, did you mix it up at all? How are you feeling?
I would say I didn't really think about another plan. I just said this is probably the most consistent one. If he switches to the thing they did in the Swiss runs, I already had a play that was gonna be able to make me in a really good situation, whichever moves it would have done. Probably not it was just a consistent play that wasn't gonna give me the win straight away. But yeah, just probably would have went for it. But I never went for a Mungus Fireman, so yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. You absolutely were able to clinch out that second game, and Maurice not able to figure out how to position that and Mungus properly. And I was surprised to see how much damage that Spirit Break was doing from Grimmsnarl. I mean, it did get the critical hit onto your Flutter Mane, but how did that feel? Yeah, so
generally speaking, people don't really see Grimmsnarl as an offensive attacker, since it just usually just set up screens, goes for Burning Shot. But actually has I think 120 of base in attack. So there's also this joke going around between me and Fede Campo, another Italian player, because when we were testing Grimmsnarl in 2020, it was really popular. Every time it was doing a lot of damage, I was saying, "Oh yeah, that's because I put 4 investments in attack." And yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, Grimmsnarl really does a lot of damage. So I kind of knew about I was expecting around 60%, so it makes sense they did around 90 with the critical hit.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, fascinating to see. Maybe we'll see Grimmsnarl pick up in usage now. Marco, you got a final to prepare for, so I won't keep you for much longer. But thoughts going into this? How are you feeling?
Honestly, I don't know, because between the two finalists, especially Maddie, I didn't feel like I had a great matchup. But yeah, who knows? You can always bring it back by just doing some predicts or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to be an absolutely scintillating final here at Malmö. Best of luck to you, Marco. Let's get into the final very shortly indeed, trainers. Do not go anywhere.